Good day, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Bao News Network, where we actually take a closer look at actually all of the different measures being taken by the federal government as far as economic relief and stimulus checks and different measures that are going to be helping everyday Americans get through this crisis. So as we go forward, I do want to share some really great news with you in regards to still possible $2,000 third round stimulus checks that may be going out. Now, it's good to keep everything realistic. We don't anticipate that these checks will actually be sent out before the IRS filing start date of February 15th, and this actually brings a new twist into everything. So before we get into it and explain to you why February 12th is such an important date, and of course that's actually 2 to 3 weeks from now, so there's going to be quite a bit of negotiation going forward. But before we actually get into why February 12th is going to be important based on information that we've gotten so far on the negotiations for this new 1.9 trillion stimulus package, please go ahead, like, share, and subscribe. If you're brand new to the channel, we're sure to appreciate it if you go ahead, like, share, and subscribe. So let's get into it without any further delay. So as we go forward into possibly the $2,000 stimulus checks, we are actually taking a look at so many different factors that are actually going into the situation or the negotiation with the new stimulus check round. So if you recall, the first round was the CARES Act in March. And we're actually highlighting the timelines here so you actually understand the progression in thought as far as the change in administration from the previous administration, the Trump administration, to the Biden administration. And this transition is very important because the balance of power has changed. Now that the Democratic Party actually has dominance for the White House and has dominance for the control of both chambers as far as Congress is concerned, it kind of puts a little bit of a spin into the possibility of not only a $1,400 stimulus check, which is being pushed by our President Biden at this time, but progressives have actually still latched on to the idea that $2,000 stimulus checks are still needed by the American people. And we're talking about very targeted group of American people in the lower income bracket, those who are actually hurting the most, those with children who are they have to make sacrifices as far as possibly eating only 2 times a week so that their children can have a meal every day. This is a significant shift in the balance of power, and I'm going to explain to you why this is actually important, as not only from a standpoint of understanding the shift and balance of power, but also why families with kids could actually see more stimulus money coming their way, and why we see sort of little crumbs or footprints along the sand as far as why we do think that this next stimulus check is not going to be only more targeted, but it actually could be a more higher cumulative amount for families with at least 3 children. So going back to progressives, we're actually looking at, when we talk about progressives, we're looking at the group Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, our representative out of New York, and also Senator Ed Markey, who is a senator out of Massachusetts. We're also looking at Representative Ayanna Presley, who is also a representative out of Massachusetts, and also our newly sworn in Representative Cori Bush, who is out of Missouri, Democrat out of Missouri. And these are leading the progressives who are actually still locked on to the idea, and it has been floating around for quite some time, and it is getting a lot of steam as far as $2,000 stimulus checks. So now we've actually gone from the $1,400 stimulus checks, which would have gone up to a larger number of people, to actually targeting the $2,000 stimulus check to a tighter group of people based on their adjusted gross income for their 2019 taxes. And I'll explain to you why that is so important. Now, the pressure that President Biden is actually getting right now is pressure from actually having to target the distribution of the stimulus checks. The Senate Republicans want to work and produce a bipartisan effort in an effort to help the American people with families. And I always stress here in this episode of Bao News Network's report on the stimulus check the importance of why the shift. The shift is now more of a sympathy and compassion factor as far as addressing the needs of families with kids. So if you recall from the very first stimulus, the eligible children received, it was $500 per an eligible child, 16 and up. So then we had also 16 in eligible child, and then for the second round it was $600 per child. So now we're actually looking at possibly for the eligibility factor for a third round of stimulus checks to be possibly exceeding more than the $600 per child eligibility. The reason why we see a little bit of crumbs or footprints in the sand along the way, that it may be more than $600 per a child eligibility for the third round, is that if you recall from the Cash Act, they were trying to increase the eligibility per child from $600 to $2,000 eligibility. And then with the HEROES Act, which was also passed by the House, they were going for $1,200 per dependent. So it was actually increasing along the lines of children and dependents for American families, because the brunt, quite a bit of the suffering and brunt has been children who are actually going hungry. Now, our President Biden has increased with different executive orders pandemic EBT, which is trying to address that issue to the tune of 15% or more. As far as an increase, he has instructed the USDA to take a look at increasing the pandemic EBT, which will help children primarily who are facing issues of hunger and food insecurity for this during the pandemic. But why we are actually looking more keenly at families with children for our next round of stimulus checks is because we do see that more of the Senator Republicans are coming around with more of a sympathy factor, feeling that more funds has to go to families with children, because they're actually going to, the economy is going to really need a collective effort for everyone to get back on board, get back to work. And a lot of children are now facing food insecurity. Families as a whole has seen a significant increase in visits to food banks. This is an event that most American families have never had to succumb to before. So now there's actually a sympathy factor, and it's a bipartisan support to increase support for children, families with children, for the next round of stimulus checks. Targeting is going to be very important in a negotiation for the next round. If you recall from the very first and second round of stimulus checks, we were actually looking at a 75K single and 150K couples AGI, adjusted gross income, for 2019, and if you were the head of the household, you were looking at possibly 112,000.5 for the cutoff. Now, one of the aspects of the tightening that they're negotiating right now is what's called a phase-out factor, whereas as the income increases, then there'll be a dollar for every over $1 over $20 for the AGI, which was the initial phase-out factor. They would actually use $1 for every $10 phase out factor and when it comes to AGI. And it does get a little bit complicated as far as the phase out factor is concerned, but if you consider simply that they'll be going from $1 for every $20 in AGI versus $1 to every $10 AGI. Basically, they're tightening the window and reducing the amount of stimulus check money that will be sent to people who make a certain cap. And also keep in mind too that what's also on the table is multiple stimulus checks, and this is where the exciting part is. It's a very slim chance that we will possibly get periodic multiple stimulus checks if you actually earn within a lower income bracket, and we are looking at a previously proposed act through Representative Ro Khanna of Democrat out of California and Representative Tim Ryan, Democrat out of Ohio, and they initially proposed that for the length of duration of the pandemic, that families were to receive $2,000 per month up to a cap of a year, with $500 going per an eligible child, and up to 3 children max. So this was also discussing, and it is getting a little bit more steam now, possibly because we have Andrew Yang, who is actually he had initially proposed that what was called a universal basic income. So now that we do have a shift in power as far as a balance of power with the Congress and the federal government, there's now chatter in social media that possibly there's a slim chance that multiple stimulus checks may be passed for the very lower income brackets going forward into 2021. And if you do recall previous updates for Bound News Weather, we discussed that Janet Yellen and a lot of different economists are stating that this is the time now more than ever to go big or go home with the stimulus check, simply because the economy is on very, very shaky ground. And keep in mind, what happens here in the United States has a ripple effect throughout the entire world. So because so many other nations actually depend on the prosperity of the United States. So we're actually looking at a global effort. Whatever actually happens with the stimulus here could have a definite ripple effect throughout the entire world. So this is something that we're definitely taking a closer look at when it comes to the stimulus round checks. So if you also recall that for the IRS, they will start processing on February 12th. The reason why, as I mentioned earlier in this episode, why February 12th is so important is simply because they are negotiating whether you could possibly get a larger stimulus check. There's a possibility that you may actually get a larger stimulus check if you were to e-file for 2020, and based on the AGI and other factors, they may use the information in the 2020 tax return to determine your eligibility for next round of stimulus. We don't anticipate that there will be any kind of passage of a rescue plan, the American Rescue Plan, before the February 12th. So there's possibility that they may put a spin into the criteria for receiving the stimulus check as far as what your AGI is for those who e-file for 2020, or else they'll simply revert back to the 2019 tax return. So that is actually one option that one criteria that we're actually looking very, very closely at when we actually study all of the different chatter that we're seeing on social media, as far as Twitter feeds from the different Republicans and the Democrats in the House and the Senate. We're actually studying a lot of the different posts on Twitter and then bringing that information back to you so that we can get an idea of exactly what's being discussed in Congress. So the other issue too, if you recall, in the first round of stimulus checks, if you didn't have a social security number, let's say a family of 3 didn't have, if one parent had the social security number and the spouse didn't have the social security number, then those without some social security numbers may have been in jeopardy of not getting didn't receive eligibility for receiving funds for children. So that is one issue that they're actually looking at going forward, if for the difference between the first round of stimulus checks versus the second round of stimulus checks will be eligibility for those who have a social security number. So if one parent has the social security number and then the other parent doesn't, then they will still be able to go ahead and request a full amount for both, as well as receive up to for three children, the max allowed per an eligible child. So social security numbers will be an issue as far as eligibility. And also they have tied in to the fact that you may be able to apply for a recovery rebate credit if for whatever reason, because you didn't have a social security number for the first round of stimulus checks, then you may be able to apply with a recovery rebate credit on your 2020 tax return to try and claim any previous stimulus because you didn't have the social security number. So that is a very, very important issue. The one issue that I wanted to raise with the Social Security issue, and it is controversial, is that this left out a significant portion of the American population, primarily immigrants, and immigrants are a significant factor, contributing factor to the health and well-being of the American economy. And because they were left out, many families, immigrant families who contribute to the American family, many of whom disproportionately were working very hard to make sure that our supermarket shelves were fully stocked throughout the 2020 pandemic, and many of us went without noticing any kind of shortages or any kinds of deficiencies when it came to our shopping experience. For no reason whatsoever should this segment of our population, which is so important, and they are well deserving of any stimulus money simply because of the significant contribution that they make to the American experiment on a daily basis. It got to the point where several states actually had to appropriate tax dollars specifically to addressing this discrepancy among undocumented immigrants. They're still contributing to the American economy. They're still performing different jobs along the way. It's simply for the sake of their document status. They were left out of the loop as far as payments for stimulus. So I'm hoping that by resolving this issue with a social security number, we will actually be able to include more of populations of the American experiment who are still making contributions to make sure that all of us are prospering, and also are actually being able to thrive in this pandemic. So if we actually take a look also, there's an issue that we did see, which is very interesting. With the previous stimulus checks, up to 1 million deceased people actually received stimulus checks. So now, one of the criteria for going forward is that the death master file is going to be shared. So that will mean that there'll be fewer checks actually going out to deceased family members, and in many cases those family members had to send back the money to the Treasury because of course, why send money to deceased people? So this is going to be another issue that they're going to be taking a look at. There are a lot of issues to take a look at going forward for this third round to make sure that the funds are actually going to the right people, to the people who are actually needing it the most. They're going to be using phase-out factors when it comes to the AGI which will actually decrease the total cost to the United States government as far as the cost of the bill, but it will actually target more keenly to the people who actually need it the most, who are low-income families with children. As I touched on a previous note in a previous edition for stimulus checks, I wanted to bring up the issue as far as the impact, once again, of restaurant bankruptcies, and I'll be very brief. If you recall, with the restaurant industry, it accounts to possibly 15 to 16 million jobs. Now, I wanted to do a contrast between the bailout for the American airline industry and the restaurant industry. I do feel that the federal government has to have a targeted package, some type of structured package rescue plan for the American restaurant industry, just like they did for the airline industry, where with the first CARES Act, $25 billion was set aside, which allowed airlines to actually keep their employees on payroll up to September 30th. And a lot of these employees and the airline groups lobbied very well to the federal government to get another support going for 15 billion, which allowed them to recall up to 32,000 furloughed workers who had been laid off as a result of the pandemic. It's this type of relief that the restaurant industry by all means has to receive in some structured way. I do understand that the restaurant industry doesn't have a systematic mechanism such as the airline industry, as far as furloughing, as far as any kind of unionization. But the restaurant industry is also very, very important to the recovery of the United States economy, just like and I fully supported the airline bailout. In fact, I feel like the airline should have gotten another 25 billion because the 15 billion that was in the act that was signed in December as a last signing bill by our former President Trump, that's only going to buy them a few months of time as far as a safety net going into 2021. And as you already know, the airlines have seen a significant drop in foot traffic, not only in the airports, but people who are traveling, simply because most people are seeing this as a significant crisis, and they're simply not traveling at this time. But in all fairness, instead of offering 15 billion, they should have received another round of 25 billion, which would have probably given the airlines another breathing room of maybe 6 months through to the summertime, which would allow them to negotiate more stimulus. The airline industry is such an important factor in the recovery of the American economy. It has a ripple effect throughout so many different industries, but also the restaurant industry is also very important. So there has to be some kind of rescue plan, possibly as a standalone bill, just for the restaurant industry. We're talking about 16 million people who are impacted, and a lot of these restaurants, if you were to take any city, on any given day, they had their business reduced to a 25% capacity on a dine-out basis because of stay-at-home orders. So this significantly crippled liquidity as well as revenue for restaurants. So I am hoping that those who are watching this video will reach out to their congressmen and their senators, appealing for some kind of rescue plan for our brothers and sisters who work in the restaurant industry and their families, because they have actually suffered a significant blow from this pandemic, along with many other industries. But if we look closely at the airline industry and the restaurant industry and other industries, we're going to actually have to have a collective effort to bring the United States economy back, and it's going to have a significant impact on the world economy as to how we actually come back, whether we come back in the latter part of 2021 when we return to some normalcy, or if it's going to be in 2022. So I am appealing that there'll be some rescue plan for the restaurant industry and any other industry that has been impacted significantly as it has been as the airlines and the restaurants. Okay, so that is actually what we're looking at. To summarize, we are very, very confident there is a possibility that we're looking at a $2,000 stimulus check. We don't anticipate anything passing before February 15th. We will continue to monitor the Twitter feeds of many of these representatives in our elected representatives in our Congress and in the federal government. I do know that most economists are pushing very strongly for a very big stimulus package, only to prevent the American economy from teetering over the edge to a point where it was going to be so difficult for us to recover that we'll be looking at 2023 or 2024 before we return to any kind of normalcy. So it's so important for them to go big now that they have all of the most important economists, Powell and Yellen and many other economists who are actually pushing for a good, healthy stimulus check, stimulus round, which is not actually going to help, not only helps the American people, but also helps the American economy and the small businesses. Has to be very, very targeted to mom and pop stores who employ 5 to 10 people or more. It has to be very, very targeted to lower income families with children, and we have to make a significant effort to make sure that we limit hunger among American children as much as possible, and the world if we can. So that is another edition of Bao News Network. I hope that this is helpful to you. Please like, share, and subscribe, especially with friends and family who are being impacted by the events of based on this pandemic. And we will continue, as always, to monitor what is actually happening on social media and the chatter feed on Twitter and different forms of social media from the representatives when it comes to unemployment compensation, stimulus checks, and so forth. So thank you for watching another episode of Bao News Network, and have a great day.